Hello, everyone. How are you? Yay, all right. Okay, so our panel today, the idea is, as Brett kind of shared this morning in the survey data that he was sharing, the path to how each of us got into project management is extremely varied, and what we do once we become a project manager is really varied. So the idea behind this panel was to get 5 of us to just share our stories of how did we get here, what did we do once we became a PM, what did our journey look like, and then allow you guys to ask questions that you have about our journey, about where you might see your career going next, all of that good stuff. So here's how we're gonna do it. First, I will introduce our panelists. So we have Shahina Patel, Dave Pryor, Betty Chan, Abby Fretz, and me, Meghan McInerny. There's all of our Twitter handles. So what we're gonna do is each of us is gonna give sort of a lightning talk version of our career. So I'm gonna set the timer on my phone. Each of us gets 5 minutes, and we're gonna give you a whirlwind tour of how we got here. And that gives you guys 25 minutes to come up with questions. So when we're done, we'll ask questions. I know you in the blanket, I heard you have a question. That's why we were pointing at you earlier. So I have this cool box that I'm just gonna whip at your head, and then you're gonna ask your questions. And then when there's other questions, we're just gonna throw the box wherever the questions are. What could go wrong? Nothing. It's gonna be great. I'm terrible at sports also, by the way, so I'll probably throw it to someone in the front row who will then throw it to you. Okay, so you guys ready to go? Does that sound good? Is that what you showed up for? Great, okay. So we're gonna start, this is my path. So I'm gonna get my phone, I'm gonna set my timer for 5 minutes. So the idea here too was for us not only to share like all the cute, pretty versions of our career path, but also just to get real about kind of the things that happen along the way, like companies close, you get laid off, like just shit happens. Can I swear? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I did. Cool. Oh, good, okay. Shit happens, right? So let's not tell this like sanitized, beautiful version of our career paths, because I think sometimes it's quite easy to look at somebody who gets to a certain job in their career and go like, wow, they really have it all together. I bet they had an amazing plan. Spoiler alert, none of us had a very amazing plan. We're all just tumbling through space. So we will share with you how we have tumbled through space, and you will feel better about your own lack of a plan. Okay, 5 minutes, here we go. Okay, so I went to the University of Minnesota to the School of Journalism. I majored in copywriting, mostly because I didn't know what to do with my life, and my dad was a copywriter, so I was like, I guess I'll do that. Went to school for less than a year. My dad was a Marine. He said, if you're gonna stay in school, you have to maintain like a 3.5 GPA or above. I did not, so I left. Took a couple of years off, worked as a regional trainer for a company called Discovery Zone. Any of you guys remember that place? It was like an indoor playground. Oh yeah, So I would travel around the Midwest and I would open up these new locations and train people and set up the computer systems and stuff. My first salary was $17,000 a year, and I thought, oh my, I was rich. I bought a car, like I was so excited. Okay, so Discovery Zone, that was cool. Then I worked in a Montessori school, and if you wanna know where I picked up most of my project management skills, it was being a Montessori teacher. And then what's not listed there was a gig as an administrative assistant at a Catholic church, also lasted there for about a year. If you picture me working in a Catholic church, it was just what you imagine. It was like a sitcom. It was fun and hilarious, but I mention it because it was a turning point for me because my computer was the only computer in the office that was connected to the internet, and the job was very boring, and I was done with it by about 10:30 a.m. every day, and I would spend the rest of the day on Yahoo chat rooms, and like that was what ignited the love of the internet for me, was working in this Catholic church. Oh, and the reason why I had the internet was because I had to FTP the church bulletin to the printer. Like that was literally the only use we had for the internet in the office. Also, I definitely got a bunch of viruses on that machine, and they were like, how did this happen? I'm like, I don't know, it's just like the bulletin getting FTP, I don't know what happened. So then I became an account executive at a marketing agency, and it was there that I ended up going back to school, so put myself through school while I was working as an account executive. While I was there, I met Nancy Lyons, who is the CEO of Clockwork, where I work now. She was running Bitstream Underground. It was an ISP and web development shop. Saw her, she came in to speak to the account team, and I just saw her and was like, I need to work for her. So I stalked her until she gave me a job. I always say she had two choices. One was a restraining order, the other was a job offer. Thankfully, she chose job offer, so that was good for me. That was my first true job in interactive, and I remember walking into that agency and going, oh my God, these are my people. And it felt so good. So that was my first project management job. Then that company was ultimately sold, so I went and worked as a creative director for a company called Mirovitz & Company. It went bankrupt, so one day I went into work and then I didn't have a job anymore, which extra sucked because I had a company car, so that meant I also didn't have a car anymore. So the first thing I did when the company closed is I drove my car back to the dealership and then quick bought a car before they realized I didn't have a job. Then I worked at Electronic Media Group as an interactive producer, which at that time just was a fancy way of saying I managed email campaigns for this large hair salon. I cried every day coming home from that job, and I lasted there about 7 months. Then I went to an advertising agency in Minneapolis called Martin Williams, also worked at another advertising agency called Call McVoy. That was fun, but also advertising agencies and interactive are really two different cultures, and it was very exhausting to constantly justify my existence and explain to art directors why I couldn't control line breaks. And I got sick of building Flash microsites. In 2006, I had my first child. So I point that out because that really just like changes your worldview and your tolerance for BS. So I left after my maternity leave and went to Clockwork. Nancy and I had stayed in touch, and she said, hey, I think we're ready for a project manager. Do you want to come work for us? And I was like, I've literally been waiting for this for like 5 years. Yes, I do. So I moved to Clockwork. My first title there was managing director, but we were 12 people. That meant I was the project manager. I did strategy. I did UX. I took out the garbage. I ordered the groceries. I did all of the things. About 3 years ago, I became the COO of Clockwork. And then I still am. And then in 2014 to 2016, you can see a nice little explosion there of death, divorce, depression. It was a really great time. So actually at the DPM Summit 3 years ago, I was supposed to speak and didn't because my dad was dying. And so he died 3 years ago. A month later, my brother-in-law died. My sister had a miscarriage. Then I got a divorce. Then my hedgehog died. And I had to give up my cat. So it was a really great time. I learned a lot. But I point all that out because like that really, it shifted my career. It shifted my mindset again in the same way that having a child does. And I feel way better now. I'm like a whole new person. Zoloft is the best. Oh my God, and that's my timer. That was a really good ending line. Okay, so that's the idea. Each of us is just going to give you our 5-minute spiel about who we are, what we did, how we got here, and you guys are going to come up with cool questions for us in a few minutes. Shahina, are you ready?
Me next?
You are next. All right. Okay. So let's go to your journey. Can you see that okay?
I can see it okay. Can everybody else see it okay? Okay, lovely. It doesn't look as exciting as yours, but can I have my 5 minutes visible? Yep. Wonderful. Okay. So this particular journey starts in 2007. That's when I changed my degree course. I went from neuroscience, which I was studying, to biology with business. I went to university in the first place because I needed to not live at home anymore, and I wanted to live in a bigger city. I chose neuroscience because it was a bit sciencey, but it wasn't medicine, which I was not clever enough to do. I failed my exams. I don't know if you can see that there. Failing exams was quite the eye-opener, really, because it was when I got to university that I realized there's nobody making me do anything, and that was, I think, the first point in my life where I was like, these decisions are mine, and I have to do these things and be responsible for them. Nobody else, you know, in the nicest possible way, but nobody really cares about that stuff, and I have to care more about it than anybody else. So I sort of pulled up my socks a bit after that, after failing those exams, because seeing your friends sort of move on to the final year and you have to redo things was not my favourite time of university. It carries on. In 2008, I was an e-learning technologist intern. That meant I had to learn how to make a game, and nobody watched me do this for 8 weeks, and I still don't know how successful it was. But it is fantastic on my CV. Don't you think that looks quite good? And I used that one a lot. I came back to it a lot when it came to moving into digital, which I did a bit later. We'll get to that. I was a project coordinator for a voluntary project called Beco Bikes. This is where I learned how to build and fix bikes and teach other people to do that as well. Eventually, I left the University of Manchester, class of 2010. That's when I graduated, 2 years after all of my friends. They're all earning loads of money. I was still a poor student at that point. I then became a project manager, and I worked for a firm called Japanese Knotweed Control. Does anybody know what Japanese knotweed is? Yeah, terrible, highly invasive species. Nothing to do with computers and things. I did that because I thought after university that I really, really wanted to be an environmental manager. And I thought that sounds kind of related. And I did that for a while. And eventually I went, oh God, I'm still in this job. I'm not getting any closer to where I want to be. And I sat down to do an application for the further studies I needed to be this environmental manager, and realized my heart really wasn't in it, and had a bit of a crisis at, 20, whatever I was. I'm like, oh shit, what am I going to do? Had a chat with my friend George. George was the owner of Common Mode, which is what I did in 2013. And he said, we need a project manager, come and work for us. This is a startup, him and his mates, both friends of mine. And I ended up, sounded like I was a bit like the MD, really, the job that you did, just did stuff that wasn't development, basically. And got laid off, sadly, after a few months because we ran out of money. Because I did the invoicing, I could see it coming as well. I had a really, really awkward leaving party. It was like, well, we're not really celebrating, are we, guys? And I just feel guilty that you're buying me these drinks and this food. So anyway. And then I went on to my first, I don't want to call it my first proper job as a project manager, but it was the one where I went into the job with experience. And that one was called EMS Internet. I got fired from that. And that's a dreadful feeling. And I can talk about that later if anybody cares about it. But just side note, my group, Midwest Breakout Sessions, I know we didn't get round to that bit about what makes a good DPM. We'll talk about it tomorrow. Keep this in mind and talk to each other, okay? I've got some ideas, but, maybe not mine are all the best ideas. And then after that, I became a project manager at Sigma Consulting Solutions, which I've just left. But just before that, in the middle, I became an organizer for a conference, Deliver Conference. And coming up is my move to Canada. It's technically not today, it'll be on Friday. I've got about half a minute left. So I think this is all one colour. If I was going to put my little explosions on there, they'd be shit-coloured, I guess, and they'd be 2014 when I got fired, a bit after 2007 when I failed those exams, and maybe a little bit in 2013. But it was fine because it happens. And like I learned early on, you're in control of those decisions. And so it's okay. You just do the next thing that you want to do. I think that's me.
That's you.
That's
also
nice music.
that's the sound, the theme song from Sherlock.
Oh, is that deliberate?
I'm a dork. Oh. No, it's because I'm a nerd.
So it's the same thing.
All right.
It's either that or the IT crowd. Those are the two things. Yeah, thank you.
I feel extra old since you graduated in 2010. Mine's a lot longer.
Shaheen, I do want to come back to, along the bottom, we have got the battled anxiety, depression, and imposter syndrome like a boss. So we will talk about that, I think, during the Q&A. So we're going to move over to Dave. You ready?
Yep.
All right. Here's your journey.
All right. I'm going to try to do it really fast. Now, I graduated from school, and my plan was to work in the music business, and I spent a couple years doing that, and I suck at every single aspect of it. The last job that I had, though, I was a part-time talent scout, and the other part of the day I spent working for Clive Davis. I don't know if you guys know who he is, but he's kind of a big deal. And I learned an immense amount of stuff from watching that guy interact with people, and that plays a lot into how I do project management. He had the ability to say to somebody who's super famous, like, that song you wrote is a piece of garbage, but you're awesome. And it was really impressive. And when I couldn't take working for him anymore, I called a friend of mine who worked at Nickelodeon, and I said, you got to get me out of here. And she says, well, I have a job. So I went over there, and my job was to spend my day monitoring chat rooms. So I'm old, so this was on AOL, and basically all I did all day was talk about farting and SpongeBob and tell kids to stop cursing at each other. I was really good at that. And so I started to build games and stuff, and there was one day, like this moment when I was walking across the floor, and I realized, like, I'm actually good at something finally. Like, I'm good at planning stuff. I'm good at figuring out how to get this stuff done, and I enjoy it. It appeals to all my kind of OCD tendencies and my need to constantly try to please people and never satisfy them. So I wanted to get better at that. This was at the beginning of the dot-com boom, so I kind of jumped around from agency to agency, and everywhere I went, it was always some sales guy promising stuff that was impossible and saying, go talk to Dave. So I kind of lived under the wheels of a bus. And the only way I could find to get out of that was I started to study about project management. About that time, I started my own company. And one of the great tests of a marriage is to start a company with your spouse and 2 of your friends, and then not do what your spouse wants you to do, and then the company collapses in a giant burning heap. So that was a big learning experience for me. It taught me that I'm not somebody who's called to being an entrepreneur. Like, I don't want that job. I don't want the risk. I don't want the stress. I don't want the 6 or 7 years of financial recovery it can take afterwards. That was a big learning for me. So anyway, back then I lived in New York, and after the company collapsed, we were going to move to Texas because I got offered a job. We lived 2 blocks from the World Trade Center, and we were supposed to move out on September 12th, 2001. We left a day early. That was also, if you have a bad day, I have a different scale for what bad days are. But we got out of that okay, moved to Texas, became a PMP, and started to run a PMO. And I also started to volunteer for PMI. So I ran the second largest component in PMI, it was about 5,000 members, and did that for a number of years. I think volunteering for organizations like that, or like the Bureau, is an amazing way to build a network, a really powerful network. I have friends all over the world. I got to travel all over the place on somebody else's dime and learn about how people do different things. And then I got sued by PMI, along with my whole board. And if you're going to get sued by a giant global organization, the best way to do that is if the organization suing you has to pay for your lawyers. So that was it was heart-wrenching to spend 9 years volunteering for somebody who then accused you of doing something that clearly you hadn't done, and they dropped the suit a year later. But it was an incredible learning experience in terms of business and how to deal with that kind of stuff. So from there, I moved on, taught PMP certification, realized I hate doing that, moved into consulting, and kind of stumbled into Agile. Like, I didn't want to do it. I spent 8 years trying not to do it. I ended up at a place where I didn't have an option anymore. Wow, I got to go faster. And the reason that I do what I do now is because I hated Agile, and going through that process of making that change took me 8 years, and it sucked. And I love that my job now is to make it suck less for other people. So for me, all this stuff, going through all these companies, it's about all the things, all the bad things, like all the shitty things that happen. Those are the things that teach you how to find the good things. When I wanted to do Agile, the only way I could end up doing it was going to a company that already was Agile. And it took a while to find the right one, but now I'm very blessed in that I get to work with people who are way smarter than me and are very open and sharing, and it's really fun. So I love what I do. I've got 15 seconds left. What else should I say?
I think it's appropriate that the Agile guy finishes early.
Okay.
Like, it's like
That's for you, Shahina.
a sick burn on the rest of us.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay, so next up we have Betty Chan. Are you ready? Are you setting your own timer so you can see? Okay.
So can everyone see the slide okay? Because
Oh,
it won't
yeah.
really matter.
I know, right? Let me apologize because Betty sent me edits to her journey that I somehow didn't get. And so her journey's wrong, but she's going to walk you through the correct version.
So I hope you guys can follow along. So I graduated from Babson College, which is an entrepreneurship school, Dave, in 2008. Yeah, no, I've never started a company. I probably will never do it because I have the same fear. I just don't want that obligation at that scale. But I went to Babson because it was the best school of the option that covered my tuition and everything else. The next runner-up school was BU, and they were offering $10,000 less than what Babson was offering in terms of grants, and there was no way. Like, I come from a family where if I didn't have that grant money, I would not have been going to college, so I just took the first option that I had. That being said, now whenever I look back at my experience at Babson, I think it put a lot of business awareness in the front of my mind, which makes me be able to translate very well to clients in meetings. So I think there's some stuff to be thankful for there as well. During college, I was a writing center consultant. That sounds really fancy. All that means is I tutor freshmen how to edit their resumes and cover letters. Even fancier sounding is I interned at Procter & Gamble as a consumer market knowledge intern. And all that means is that I run focus groups and spend like thousands of dollars to tweak maybe like a 5-word phrase that shows up in a market aisle that you will never read because you already know what you're gonna get. So that was my internship. And then again, still in college, I figured, all right, I don't want to do consumer products. Corporate life is not for me. So let's try something more agency, Arnold Worldwide. I just thought, okay, since I'm in business, strategy seems to be like the upfront thing. Let me be an intern about that. I don't think I did anything with strategy. I don't honestly remember what I did during that semester. But yeah, I got a taste of Arnold and also decided I didn't want to work in a large agency. I felt like a cog, and that was the only thing I really remembered. So I graduated from college actually in 2008, and who here graduated in 2008? But it was a sucky year to graduate because the job markets were not great. I couldn't find a job when I came out for the first 6 months. So I ended up to work with my dad at an agency called Everready Blueprint. It is a print shop. We do blueprints, large scale. Like if I stand up, it's the papers of my size. Working with architects and doing that. So I actually changed my wardrobe that year. Everyone I worked with was an older male. And you have to bend over a lot to roll these papers, so I had to buy shirts that had crew necks and couldn't wear anything low cut after that. So that was a life decision there. So after that, the market started picking up a little. One of my I guess friend is something you can call him, from someone I knew from college, started his own company called Tato, which is now bankrupt and doesn't exist anymore. And can you just imagine like 20-something-year-olds starting their own company, like rolling in dough, because it's like selling ads and selling ad placements. It was like one of the first time doing it. These were the biggest jerks I've ever worked with in my life. Like, I would walk through the kitchen and they'd be like, oh, you look so good in that skirt, Betty. And I'm like, you do know that's sexual harassment, right? Like, just letting you know. But I stayed there for a year. I got the fancy title of art director, which I can get really graphic with this, but I also helped with adult entertainment ads. So I had to hide my computer from my mom whenever I was working on stuff, really. So I left that job thinking, okay, from now on, I can't do anything that sucks the soul out of my life, so let me make more conscious decisions after this. While I was at Everready, I learned to use Photoshop and Illustrator on my own, and I thought, okay, why not venture and like do design? I taught myself, I did a little bit of that. I just gave myself a name called DISA, Design Workshop, just to have a name to stand behind. But then I'm a social person, so I was like, okay, I need a little more interaction than being at home all day. I applied to be a web developer at Brooklyn Botanic Garden. It is very therapeutic to take a 20-minute walk through a garden every day, and I still miss it. And even then, that was just a 2 days each week kind of job, and I needed health insurance. So I applied to Apple. My friend recommended it. I love it. Like, I know I'm on the floor, I'm just selling computers. The health benefits are great. People are super friendly. Apple knows how to hire like the right personality at times, so I still keep connected with a lot of people there. But it's not something that you can grow into. You're selling computers. Unless I become really like tech savvy and become a genius, there's not really a career path that worked for me there. So after doing that for a year, having 3 jobs, and oh no, I'm running out of time.
It's fine. You
So-
can use Dave's 10 seconds.
So all 3 paths, I was like working 7 days out of the week. I came back and I got invited to work at Barrel, my first digital project management job. I didn't know what it was. Worked there for 6 years. Last year I left because around April I had 22 projects. I broke down and cried in a fountain in Midtown. I took a 3-month sabbatical and never went back, and now I'm at a company called Purpose that only works on social impact projects. So hopefully it's a better choice.
Thank you. Okay, Abby, you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, let's get to your journey.
And I'm blind, so I'm going to do the same thing. Hi, I'm Abby Fretz. So I will start at school, university. I studied international conflict studies. I got a chance to travel the world with that degree. And a lot of it focused on international conflict, but I took a lot of courses in conflict mediation, which, as you all can imagine, really set the tone for, or gave me a lot of tools to use in my life as a project manager now. Right out of school, I started doing mediation, which I hated, active mediation with really small kind of an alternative to arbitration cases, and it was soul-sucking, and I just would get frustrated with people for not being able to solve their really obvious problems, which I do now. So I moved on from that, realized that was not going to be a career for me, landed in Philadelphia, and randomly landed an event planning job. And this was an event planning job with I had no background in this. And I was working with people with the super wealthy of Philadelphia on, 2-year-old birthday parties that were like $30,000. So I very quickly learned about budgeting, about planning very complex events with lots of moving parts. It is pretty directly translated to project management even in the digital space. I worked there for a couple years, and it was kind of that soul-sucking thing where I was working 24/7, weekends and during the week, no stop, and had a little bit of a breakdown. That was when I first started experiencing anxiety and panic attacks. And so very much realized also that it was soul-sucking because I didn't want to be throwing $30,000 parties for 2-year-olds. It didn't feel very fulfilling. A friend of mine, actually a bartender who worked at a nonprofit as a digital project manager and made no money there, and so did bartending on the side at these events, told me that I should really check out digital project management. So I started working at a geospatial software design company as a project assistant, which meant did a little bit of everything. I managed their website, I did marketing, emails, that kind of thing, and slowly moved into managing a suite of projects that were all elections and politics and redistricting focused. It was amazing. It was super stressful because I was a newbie and had no training, but I had exposure to a wide variety of things in the digital space and loved it. I got my GIS certification, which is Geographic Information Systems. Thought I would become a map maker, but it really helped. It was the first time when I realized that I could become an expert within my field in a very specific area, and have continued doing that, taking classes that relate to what I'm doing in my job throughout my career. I was a product manager at that point, and Agile had just been introduced to the company. Hated it. I was on a product for years, and it was a fairly slow-moving product. Didn't really evolve a whole lot over the course of the time I was there, and so I moved. Again, it was suggested to me that maybe agency life was more what I would be looking for. So I moved into that. Let's see. Did I miss anything? I think I did not. Okay, so I went to a very small agency of maybe 4 or 5 people just to test the waters. I was there for a year. They were doing tiny microsites, and I knew there was a lot more out there for me. So I looked around for a more established company and found Happy Cog. I started working there when was that? what does it say?
2013.
2013, thank you. And that was amazing. Again, this anxiety that I had experienced as an event planner came back. Working with Happy Cog had really great clients, very high-profile clients. It was self-imposed anxiety. The projects were great. I really enjoyed working on them, but I had it in my mind that I had this imposter syndrome thing, and had it in my mind that I wasn't going to live up to these clients' expectations. I got through that period of time, which was kind of crazy, not sleeping very much at all, not eating very much at all, pretty bad anxiety. Got through that, came out on the other side of that, still at Happy Cog, and I have a lot to talk about with anxiety too. I think it's something that's not necessarily talked about, but a lot of project managers deal with it. Yeah, Happy Cog. Then I recently, in the past, about a year ago, I became a freelance project manager and consultant, and had the opportunity to work with Brett on a couple consulting projects, and really loved working on those that kind of emphasized all of the pieces of project management that I love: client education, doing research, really refining process. So that's where I've landed, and I'm done. Sorry.
Cool. Okay. Thank you. Oh, Dave wants to know what an accompanier is.
Oh, so these are kind of side notes. I worked with I am working with Nationality Service Center as a volunteer, which is a refugee placement organization. And so I accompany refugees to like getting their gas bill turned on, or their gas turned on, and doing basic stuff that is not so basic for somebody who's new to the country. So there's a lot of overlap with project management there too.
Thank you, Abby. You're a real underachiever. Okay, so I hope that kind of gave you guys a sense of just the diversity of experiences that all got us here, and like the different things that we've done with project management once we got here. So I do have some questions prepared as a moderator, but I think it's much more valuable and much more interesting if you guys ask the questions. So I know there's one already, so you want to ask it? Yeah? Okay. I'm really tempted to just really... Come on, let's see. Close. Okay, so tell it, sorry. So with the box, you don't have to hit it, just hold it up and start talking in it. Every time you hit it, the audio guys cringe. Yeah, so
I don't know if that was a frustration technique.
Yep.
Sorry, I'm gonna sit down.
So tell us your name and then your question.
Hi, I'm Lauren. My question is, what do you do as a project manager if your company doesn't A, understand what project management does, or B, does not really respect project management and empower project management to do their job?
Anybody else feeling this? I mean, quit.
I was going to say leave.
Good, we all have a suicide pact, so.
That's hard, yeah. Ooh, Brett, do you want to answer that? Just whip it.
So as a part of my career path, I worked for Razorfish in Philadelphia, and it was my first official job as a project manager, and there was no respect for the role. And I came into the role as an account director, and I wasn't allowed to talk to clients, and I just bullied my way into it. Like, I had serious conversations with people to sell them on the value of having me there and the problems of not having me in client meetings, and talking to them about the issues that it would create. And I ended up kind of educating people, I like to think, at least in some respects, and making some people uncomfortable. And I eventually moved on because I figured out that though I was on one large account as a single PM with 5 account managers who were doing all things that I could do in one job, it wasn't the right fit for me. So I ended up moving on and finding a position where I could use the skills that I knew would benefit a team.
Okay, so, and panelists, have you guys had experience with this, where you're in a place where the role isn't understood or respected, you can't talk to the client? How have you handled that? I know, Dave, you just mic dropped and quit.
I quit. I tried for a long time.
You want to use the mic?
I tried for a long time. I remember a number of years, kind of a parallel thing of trying to get them to fund the software that I wanted to use to manage projects, and they didn't care. I think for me, the trick is you've got to find out where they're in pain, and you've got to find a way to fix the pain, and that cracks it open so you can show them the value. So you've got to figure out what they need and what you can do to solve that, and open the door that way.
I think that's a good point, and I think I'd add to that. So just talking about that pain, really. Where are you? Oh, there you are. In my experience, what I try to, and it's exhausting and it's really frustrating as well, because to have all of that energy sapped from you before you've even started your working day, you know, I really feel for you. But anyway, what I learned to do was consider where I could influence and try and change that with evidence. And be really overt about it. Be really obvious about the difference that you can make with your actions. And rather than, because I spent a lot of time theorizing about it, if you get me this, if you hire these people, then I can do this and they can do that and this will be better, but nobody cares about that. If you make the difference and talk about the difference you are making, that's perhaps one active step that can help you make those arguments to help other people see the value you know you have. And also, all of these people in here, they can probably help you with that too. They can help you learn the language and have the vocabulary that you might be missing in order to have those discussions.
I think also if you have allies in designers and developers in your organization or other roles that value the work you do and are able to speak to how it impacts them, that's a really powerful dialogue to have with somebody.
Has anybody else had this experience where they had to advocate for their role for access to the client that wants to also speak to this? Because I think when you're in a situation like this, what you're looking for is examples of like, what did you say? How did you communicate to people that you should be in the room with a client or the value of what you do? Anybody want to be an honorary panelist? All right, whip that box.
Where?
That sounded wrong.
I'm going to walk part of the...
Throw the box in that direction. I just made Brett blush.
So for me, it was more of that phrase, you know, asking for forgiveness rather than asking for permission. So you just got to go for it and do it and trust in yourself. Sit on that client meeting, maybe set up one yourself, and do good, and you'll show, you know, that you're worth it.
Great.
I would like to add something to that. So that was another thing that I did was I would go to like the CTO and I would say, I'm going to do these things until you come and tell me to stop. So if you don't reel me back in, I'm going to go nuts on it. And I think they kind of just didn't really care, so they let me do whatever. But then when things went sideways on other projects, I was the first person they called. So I think that's a great point. Thank you.
Were you the first person to be blamed or to be called?
Called. I always knew who was to blame.
Just to layer on an extra option, it didn't work out for me, so I don't know how sageful this advice is. I have a boss who used to just love reading articles. So if you were not sharing an opinion that was already written up in an article, then he's not going to listen to you. So if you know there's a person that he or she admires or looks up to, and they write or produce stuff that supports your points that you were going for, that's a good way to be that helpful person. Like, hey, I'm forwarding this along. Look, this person you really look up to really values project management because of X, Y, and Z reasons. That might be something worth trying.
One thing that I've done in my career, so I experienced this most often when I was in advertising agencies, and the account people really felt ownership of the relationship, and they were reluctant about who they wanted to have contact with their client. And I tried to really understand what is their resistance, what is their fear. And when I was able to sort of uncover, like, well, what they're afraid of is me negatively impacting a relationship they've taken a really long time to build. So how can I build that trust with them, serve them, so that they see how I can serve the client? So kind of baby stepping them into it. I also have in the past suggested kind of pilots. So hey, on this project, why don't we try me helping you lead these status calls with the client, and let's see how that goes. Let's try one and kind of see how that feels. Or maybe let me listen in, and then they would realize as I was listening in that the question the client was asking they couldn't answer, and they would just look at me like, okay, answer it. So there's maybe some kind of baby step ways to get yourself there. But I feel for all of you who raised your hands, because it's an exhausting place to be when you're doing a job that it doesn't feel like is understood or valued. Okay, other questions? Was that a hand? No? Okay. Hand here. Okay, let's gently walk the box over, I guess, depending on how brave you're feeling. It should be inside like a beach ball or something.
Beach ball would be great. Hi. Dave, you did PMP and all sorts of certifications. What would you say is the most valuable education experience for a project manager other than
So I got
experience?
my PMP a long time ago, and that was really important to me, establishing credibility, like in the organization, saying I've done this thing. I also have a master's degree in project management. That helped too. It didn't help at all when I switched over to Agile. And for a long time, I felt like I was always worried that the Agile people were going to be like, God, it stinks like project manager in here. And they'd make me wear this badge at events that said F and PMP all the time. But that's shifted a lot. So now, I mean, I have the Scrum certifications, I have all those, and I've got the PMP, but having both is really, really valuable to me because I've learned how to hang out and talk with Agile people, and I already kind of, I mean, if it was just up to me, I would just hang out with the old school project managers because I love that stuff. But I can do both. And I get a lot of people in class who are like, should I still get the PMP? That test is a nightmare, and I don't want to ever make anyone take it, but having that knowledge and that language allows me to walk back and forth between different worlds, and I find that to be really beneficial. It gives you a massive headache, though, because it's like being Jewish and Catholic at the same time. You can't really do that well. So, but those are the two, I guess. I mean, a Scrum Master certification, getting that certification is like being a 16-year-old that walks out of the DMV with a driver's license on their birthday. PMP is the same thing, it's just a harder driving test. But it helps, it gives you confidence, it gives you a language and a vocabulary that's important. So those are the ones that I think help the most.
Brett, are we allowed to go like a couple minutes over? Aren't we supposed to be done at 4? But we started late. Oh, we have till 4:30?
See, this is the same thing that happened
Sweet,
to me. I'm
okay.
like, what am I
I'm
going to
getting all
do
messed
for the
up.
next
Okay,
45
all right. Sweet. There's a dance portion later, don't worry. Okay, Brittany, do you have a question?
Oh, this is fancy. Hi. So a theme I noticed on a few of your career paths was either imposter syndrome or anxiety, and I was hoping we could come back to that topic a little bit and just if you guys could talk about how you deal with that, any tips you have, any insight.
And how do you know you have it?
Shall I go? All right, because I didn't mention it. Should we go back to my slide for
Sure,
a
yep.
second? I was worried I'd feel very exposed sat up here and sort of making this admission. And just a bit of background to how we did these slides. We had a conversation, and then I emailed a few things over to Meghan, and I did this quite late at night. And this just sort of crept out. It just sort of, it leaked out. Normally I would keep it under wraps. But you encouraged me to leave it in because you said it might help. And I thought, well, if that's true, then, let me give something back because I've personally got so much out of this community. So I'll talk a little bit about the imposter syndrome first. And the reason I wanted to come back to this, as well as showing you the timeline of it, is to point out, so 2013, when I was laid off from Common Mode, 2013, January of that year is where I met Brett at DPM UK. That later on turned into Deliver Conference, which I started organising. the reason I got to that conference is because I Googled how to be a digital project manager, so I didn't know what I was doing. My mate gave me a job because he thought that project manager was what he needed for his digital business, and I had been something that was called a project manager. So I didn't know what I was doing, and I knew I didn't know what I was doing, so I Googled it. Anyway, met Brett a year later during your death, divorce, depression. I met you because Meghan spoke at that conference as well. And this sort of kept happening, kept meeting people who were just normal and friendly, and who turned into these peers in this network that I now feel very, very fortunate to have. And the imposter syndrome still creeps up. Like, I'm sat here and telling everybody I got fired. But, you know, you have to go back to that bit where you go, I know what I know, and what I know is really relevant to lots of people. And it might not be relevant to some other people, and that's okay, because I'm not supposed to have all the answers for everybody. And that's how I remind myself that, you know, I might feel really underqualified when I'm talking to a particular person. That's allowed, and that's okay, but there's somebody else that I might not even realise, just like Brett might not have realised, or you might not have realised when we spoke, how much of a positive impact they can have on my sense of confidence and, you know, at times, my well-being as well. The anxiety, the depression, you know, who knows for me how that starts. I know that it particularly gets kick-started at times when I do feel quite overwhelmed, and these things tend to sort of get really big and everything feels like it happens at once, and you just feel crap and you just don't feel capable of anything. But yeah, it'll keep happening. I know it will, because you know, that's biology. I've got a biology degree, so I know that for a fact. But I'd say the coping mechanisms can happen, and you can build them as much as you feel confident and capable to do so. But I would say for me personally, in terms of the coping mechanisms, is to look where you might not expect to find that help, and that also your friends and your peers notice more than you think. And maybe Abby, you know, you talked about anxiety and how that just it can happen to so many of us. Me and you, we've never talked about that, and I might not have known that about you, but I know we could easily have a conversation about that, and we could probably support each other at times, you know, that we might feel as though we need that support. And you know, if there's anybody else in this room that feels as though they might want to just strike up a conversation and say, this is how I feel, I'd be happy to try and help if I could. So I hope that's useful. I hope that's something that's helpful to know.
Is it on? Yeah. I'm trying to think where to start. I think a lot of my anxiety came from feeding myself a narrative that was really about the whole imposter syndrome thing. I think the way that I got out of it, the same thing that you were saying, having a community of people really, really helped, and that actually came through the summit, but also through the local meetup that in Philly. And actually, it was less about having people to talk to specifically about anxiety, but just to talk to about the profession, and what is expected versus skill sets that are needed. Just having a chance to process it and talk through it is something that you just don't get to do very often otherwise. I think too, in the past couple years, I've been able to change the narrative that I'm talking to myself about, and also get involved in other things that give me a really grounded sense of realism, because this can get kind of, your sense of reality in digital project management can get a little bit, you know, crazy. Like, projects seem more important than they are, or failures that are small things seem really huge. So doing beekeeping was huge for me. Just being focused on something that was very ordered and that I didn't really have a whole lot of control over, but could see work out anyway. Same thing with accompanying the refugee at this organization. Just again, getting out of this mindset that I was in and seeing another reality. Yeah.
So I'm old, and when I had imposter syndrome all the time, it didn't have a name, and I had it constantly. And it became for me something that, I mean, yes, I'm super anxious, I'm freaking out, I have no idea what the hell I'm doing, but that kind of became a companion for me a little bit. And now it's a voice that I listen to. I'm not scared of it. I'm able to say, yep, I don't know what the hell's going to happen here. I am way out of my depth. I'm screwed. And that shows that you have a lot of self-awareness. The scary people to me are the ones that don't know that they have imposter syndrome. Like, they think they know frickin' everything, and they're just making it up, and they don't know. Like, I feel blessed to have that lack of self-confidence. On the anxiety side, I had one job, one of the web shops that I worked at, where they were just promising impossible stuff. I sat in a room one day with the CEO and 40 empty chairs while he was telling the client that those 40 chairs had been filled for 6 months and the project would be delivered in a week. And they should talk to me. I got an eye twitch. Like, visible eye, like my face is going like that all the time. Like, that to me, that's a sign I should probably quit that job. But back then, what I did was I would say, well, Adeo put this on me. I have to carry this. Now I know, and a lot of it's because of the Agile stuff, if I feel completely overwhelmed and stressed out, if I've got the kind of stuff that you mentioned, if I've got that going on, that's my fault. The first thing I have to do is say, I'm the one that picked this up. I can put it back down if I need to. And that is a very empowering thing for me. If I am getting an eye twitch, I'm giving myself the eye twitch. I'm just responding to stuff and doing it. So taking ownership of that is an important thing for me.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of aspects of what makes a good project manager that also, and aspects of the job that make us susceptible to anxiety and stress and depression, right? We're detail-oriented, we're driven, we're problem solvers, we want things to be really good, we put pressure on ourselves, and we're in environments often where even if the stakes aren't actually high, we are made to feel that the stakes are very high. And so I think that a theme that I've heard on this panel that I think is really important is around self-care. So, when I talked in my own journey about the death, divorce, depression kind of thing, one of the things I did is I started just pulling away from things that were not making me feel better. So I took a break from public speaking for like 2 years because I was like, this is giving me worse anxiety, and so I need to just take a break from that, and I'll decide if I want to come back to it or not. I'm back. So like Dave said, I think it's really hard for us, at least it's hard for me, and I think this is true of a lot of project managers. It feels like defeat to put something down or to just say, I'm not gonna do that. And you have to really, I think you have to free yourself from that a little bit. And it helps to have people around you in your life who keep you in check, who give you that perspective of like, if you don't send that status tonight, like no one's gonna actually die. You could maybe just tell the client it's coming tomorrow morning, right? Instead of what I would do, which is like stay up till 1 in the morning. So I'm like, no, I have to get all this stuff done. So I think there's aspects of what draws us to this job and aspects of the job that can really like flare that up. I also do want to very sincerely thank Shahina, Dave, and Abby, but especially Shahina, because I know you had a lot of worry about being vulnerable in front of a group of almost 300 people. And it was really important to me that this panel, like I said at the beginning, not just be we've got our shit together, what would you like to know from us, right? Like that it's like, there's lots of mistakes we've made, there's lots of things that we're figuring out, and I think that's where the real value comes from, is when we're actually real with each other about the actual things that we're struggling with. So thank you very much to all of you for having that honesty. I saw some clapping starting. Yes, do it. Okay, where's our special box? Well, there it is. Okay, who has a question? Okay, wait, where? Raise them high. Okay, middle red shirt, and then we're gonna come over here, and then we're gonna go over there. We got 15 minutes, guys. Let's do this.
Hi, I'm Lena. I want to know when is burnout, and what do you do about it? And when is burnout a signal that you need to move on?
I just saw Dave try to hand it to Shahina, I think you know.
It's been really fascinating to hear everyone describe like imposter syndrome and anxiety. I've never got diagnosed with it per se, but I'm always like wondering like how do I know when I've hit that level? So in my last job, I was really good. Like I'm one of the people who leaves I actually negotiated before I started a job that I leave at 5 on Monday, Wednesday, Fridays to make it to my boxing class. And it's something I do religiously. I don't care what deadline comes up, I can get back to it later. And that I think held a lot of my burnout at bay. Because when you work out, endorphins, I'm like a much happier person the next day and I feel like I can take on the world. But I felt like I actually went through a few phases of burnout. It's like you're in self-denial a few times before it really happened. And it probably grew, like I was there for 6 years. I think it started really picking up around year 3 when the honeymoon phase of the job is over. It's just piling on the stress. But to be very honest, I didn't know until, as I mentioned, I was literally crying in public in Midtown at a fountain. And I did that right after I came out of boxing class. And I called my fiance. I was like, you have to come pick me up because boxing didn't work this time. And that's when I knew I had to quit. I finished out my project, which took another few months because it's hard to put things down and say like, that's it, bye baby. But that's when I knew. I wish I had more people around me that kind of pointed that out, but I was in an environment that didn't recognize that, and even if they saw it, they just kind of brushed it under the rug. So you gotta watch out for that.
I was going to say, Lena, that I think I would look to that stages of burnout thing actually is really important. A few things to look for, I would say, is when you're getting less out of it than you're putting in. And I don't just mean time, I mean emotional, mental, even physical energy. And that's not just your day-to-day. That doesn't mean how are you progressing in your career, what salary are you getting, what opportunities have you got for work. I mean also in the way that your work fits around your life too. So if you haven't got the energy to do all of the fun things that are meaningful to you in the evening, at the weekend, etc., whether that's because you haven't got the time or you're just brain tired, so you just want to go home, you won't even cook yourself a good meal if that's what you used to. That's how I just stop cooking for myself. Yeah, and that's it. The work time takes more out of you than it's given back to you. And as I say, like fitting into the rest of your life as well, that's when I'd start to recognise it. I really appreciate the idea of stages too, of burnout. Any advice on like how you might be really practical and like track it or something?
So this goes along with what you just said and what you said in the self-care thing. So I do personal Kanban to manage my stuff. And I realized that there's basically like 5 things that I have to do every day to feel really good. And they're on the Kanban board every single morning. So I have to track them as I do them. Like if I don't meditate, I'm going to be an asshole to people all day long. If I don't play my guitar, I'm going to be cranky every day. For me, the burnout signs, it's like I can see it coming because I stopped doing that stuff. If I've got 5 things, if I get below 3 for a couple days in a row, something's not right. And I'm still not good at it. Like now it's like I'm watching the thing come and hit me in the face, but at least I can see that it's coming now. So when I stop taking care of myself, that's when the burnout is about to get here.
I want to make one quick point too about that. I think it's really powerful to have like, what are the 5 things that make me feel like refueled or fueled? Because one of the things that happened to me when I was going through the bout of depression that I had gone through, I'd never had that in my life. I'm 42. So at the time, I was like 41 and I'm like, what is this thing that's happening to me? I don't want to get out of bed. Like I dread going to work. I dread everything. And I had a therapist and she was like, well, what do you like to do? And I couldn't answer the question. I'm like, I don't know. So it's like, when people say, do self-care, that's actually step 2. Step 1 is figuring out, like, what does that even look like for you? Actually doing it is a whole different step. So thinking about and saying, like, okay, these 5 things, or like boxing 3 times a week, like, these are the things that fill me back up when my job takes a lot out of me, which is gonna happen, I think is really important, and that takes time, and it takes knowing yourself and like actually thinking about what is it that I like to do. Not things that I feel like I should do, not things that my friends like to do, but I actually want to do. I don't know about the rest of you, but it took me a little bit of thinking to figure that out. And that was surprising to me and very illuminating. I'm like, oh, no wonder I don't do it. I don't even know where to start. And I think I also had this false notion that like self-care meant like going to a spa. And I was like, well, I don't have, I mean, it does. Like, that's great. But that's like, you know, a couple $100. And like, you've got to have other elements of self-care that aren't a thing you can only afford to do a couple times a year. Okay, other questions? I know there was over here, so let's go to this side. I think like we could do little throws too, like they do at concerts. Oh, nice. Yeah,
Thank you.
it was a good throw.
My name is Adam, and looking at the burnout thing, but taking it a few steps back, I wanted to talk about family and ask you about the project managers that I've worked with and some people that I've met. We found these weird paths to get to this place, but the common connection I've seen is kind of responsibility, wanting to see something succeed, taking personal ownership in it, being a bit thick-skinned and a little bit crazy. And what I find personally is it's difficult to finish and not send that email like you talked about, to say it'll wait till tomorrow. And I was curious from your experience, what has it been like? Do you have any tips like your 5 items in the morning to help you balance disconnecting from the job and then getting back into like putting the same amount of effort and planning into your family as you do into your job?
Marry someone as dysfunctional as you are.
So I'll start with my thought, not that I think I've cracked the code on this, but I don't know if any of you are familiar with like Getting Things Done. It's a book. It's sort of like GTD, you know, way of doing things. One of the things that he talks about in that book is that you manage all of your personal responsibilities with the same amount of respect and rigor that you manage your work responsibilities. And it's actually exactly what Dave is talking about with Kanban. Kanban. Like a thing that you're doing at work is also like a way that you're managing your personal obligations. And I resisted doing it for a long time because it felt cold to me. Like, it's weird to like have an agenda for when I'm gonna talk to my daughter about. Like, that's weird. But then I realized, like, actually, no, it just means that I am putting her on the exact same playing field as my work. And if I don't do that, I'm saying I manage these things with a certain amount of discipline and rigor, and like I take it seriously, and I don't manage these things in that same way. So one of the things I think you can do is actually apply a lot of the things that you do in managing projects to how you manage your personal stuff and give it that same amount of respect and weight.
So Alistair Coburn's one of the guys that wrote the Agile Manifesto, and one thing he said in an interview one time was, there's an infinite amount of things I can't do. And if I stay up and do this email, there's still going to be an infinite amount of things I can't do. It's not going to fix anything. So sometimes it's just reminding yourself of that and letting it go.
I think too, applying the same thing you do to your clients, where you're setting setting expectations. Set expectations with everybody in your life about what your boundaries are. So you had talked about it a little bit, like setting expectations that there are certain times when you would be unavailable, but with yourself too. Your expectations of self are that I am not going to look at my email, I'm not going after 7 or something like that. I'm not going to respond to that 9 p.m. text message from a dumb client. So yeah, I think setting boundaries for yourself is huge, but also set up those expectations before it even happens.
Yeah, I agree with Abby. You can set an expectation, but it doesn't really mean anything until you stick to it and you walk that walk, and then your peers see that, and then sometimes I've had coworkers come up and be like, you are the reason why I feel like I can leave at 6:30. I'm like, that's not even early. I'm like, it's because I get moving at 5, so I guess they like meander around until 6:30 and then they go, otherwise they would leave at 9. So just know that when you do that, you're actually helping people around you too. You're giving them permission to do it as well.
Yeah, especially once you move into a more senior role, like remember that you're modeling for, even if you don't manage them, you're modeling for the people around you sort of what acceptable behavior is. So I just got an email earlier today that our HR person was responding to an applicant, and she did it on a Sunday night, and she called out in her email like, hey, don't worry, this is not usual to be working on a Sunday night, I'm just kind of catching up. And the applicant was like, oh, I think it's funny that you called that out, and also I really appreciate it. So it's like you have to think about, what message am I sending my client when I respond at 2 a.m.? What message am I sending to the people around me? I'll give you one other quick idea of something I just started doing in the last couple months, and so far I like it. At the beginning of the day, I try to set aside just a couple of minutes. I have 2 kids, and I'm a single mom now, so I don't have a lot of time is my point there. None of us do. But I take a couple minutes in the morning and I write down, what 3 things do I want to have happen today? When I go to bed tonight, if these 3 things happen, I can feel good. And it's almost always at least one work thing. But sometimes if I look at my calendar and I'm like, oh my God, I'm just going from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting, one of my things might be just notice the good. Like, you're gonna be crazy today, and if you can go to bed at the end of tonight and realize that you noticed all of the good things instead of every single problem, you can feel good about that. So that has helped me because, as Dave said, our work is never done. We are on a treadmill. The emails keep coming. The projects, everything keeps coming. And so we have to create our own definition of what done looks like and what being satisfied looks like, and it's hard.
Thank you.
We're gonna wing over to this side. We can do baby throws. I saw a bunch of hands, so all right, we're gonna go scarf. Oh, and the cool hair bow, yeah. We're gonna go with leopard hair bow. Anything animal print's gonna win me over.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hello. I think I noticed in all of your slides that you are all still digital project managers. And I was wondering, or not, or, well, if you can tell me, what is the next step? Do you think you'll be a digital project manager for the next 5-10 years? Or what would you like to, some of you said entrepreneurship, not for you. So if not entrepreneurship, what's the next step in your career past digital project management?
Man, what a great, you're our last question, and that was solid, perfect. Why don't we just go down the line? You wanna start, Abby?
Sure. It's on, okay. Thing. So right now I'm doing some freelance project management, but doing this consulting thing. I'm loving it. It's super educational for me, and it's really kind of indicating what I really want to do, what aspects of project management I love. The education piece is huge. Started doing teaching classes for Girl Develop It, and just kind of generally developing curriculum. I think that next steps could be going back to, I've had an offer for a director role at a digital agency, director of PM. That kind of thing I've definitely entertained, and it's something that I would love to do next. I think I'm still really digging this exploratory phase I've taken on, and I'm able to do it. It's given me a lot of room to explore, to kind of discover what I want to do next. But I think there are a lot of natural paths I could take from here.
I've had kind of 3 channels that I've been kind of thinking through a lot the last 2 years ever since my breakdown. I think one is becoming a director of project management, which, to be very honest, I don't quite know what that means. Tara knows. I've reached out to her. I'm like, what do you do? Do I want to do the same thing? At my company, project management is new enough that I think if that's an opportunity we can put together for me, we can actually shape it the way that fits around my skill set and my strengths, and that would be the dream. The other one of you, in my career path, I've never really given up on freelance designing. It still brings a little spark of joy in my life every day when it's not an annoying client I'm working with. So some part of me still entertains, what if I professionally go into design? What would that be like to be the executor and have a PM support me? That would be really interesting to see. And my last one is just, to be honest, get out of the digital life. Agency life is really, really hard. It's a lot of hours, it's a lot of clients, and no matter how much I try, and I try very consciously every day, my work life leaks into my personal life, and I'm thinking, I know I'm still young, but I feel like I'm getting old, and I feel like I don't have enough sleep, I don't have enough all these things, and for me, having personal time is the most important thing. So if say 5 years down the line, I just end up still being a senior PM, but doing work that fulfills me, but I get like 3-day weekends, like I might entertain that.
So I'm not in digital right now. I've been a Scrum trainer, like full-time, that's what I do. But one thing about the project management space is that this community and this conference is, from what I see, the most exciting and inspiring corner of all of project management. So I'm hoping that as Agile matures in this space, I can eventually find my way back to an agency and use it as sort of a lab to figure out how to get Agile to work better in that space. But I mean, the reason that I'm so excited to be here is because I learned so much from all you guys that I don't learn from the crusty old people at the PMI conference or the cranky bigots at the Agile conference.
Welcome. I didn't catch this person's name. Leopard Herbo?
I'm Alexis.
Alexis, hey. I'm not a digital project manager either because I don't have a job right now. So if anybody out there is in Canada...
Hire Shahina.
...and you're looking... Let's talk. But anyway, I'm deliberately going to take a bit of time off to decide what I want to do. I have decided that what I'm going to do is going to feel fulfilling to me on a personal level. I realised that, kind of looking back at project management and project management life, one of the things that's frustrated me is having to sort of realise and fulfil another person's ambitions based on decisions that I had no say in. And I think what that looks like, or the difference there, what I'd more like to do is probably be more involved in those decisions, whatever that looks like. So help people make better decisions, potentially, whatever that looks like. But yeah, I feel quite comfortable with spending a bit of time working it out, and that might not be helpful to you. But what drew me to this and what has kept me in this sort of industry for all this time has just been what people are like here, which is we're all sort of muddling through, and that's really reassuring to me. And that at the end of the day, it's probably just a website or it's just an app. There's not too huge a responsibility if things do go wrong. And there is this opportunity to keep challenging yourself as a person and keep learning. So I don't feel as though I might be a digital project manager forever, unless anybody's got a job for me, which I will do starting next week. But yeah, I'll... Something fulfilling is what I'll be looking for.
So I am a COO, but really my job is the project manager of the company. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the keynote tomorrow morning. So I'll see you bright and early, and I'll tell you all about it. Cool. Thank you so much for your time. We went a tiny little bit over, but thank you. Hope this was helpful. And thank you to each of you, Abby, Betty, Dave, Shahina.